Hello, and welcome to this episode of Town Tales, where we travel to different towns to discover their folklore and its impact on the community. I'm your host, Caleb Keefe, folklore investigator. In this episode, we will learn about the Hodag of Rhinelander, the ghost town of Baraboo, and the witches of Whitewater. Folklore is a myth, story, or legend that resides within a community and is passed down through the generations. So sit tight, we're about to get started. Welcome back. Joining me now is T. Krulos, local author, journalist. Thanks for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.
How did you get involved with folklore?
I think it goes back to my childhood. My parents read me stories at night, and a lot of those had to do with mythology or legends, and it developed a love for storytelling. And I eventually became a writer and wrote a book titled Wisconsin Legends and Lore, which collects folklore from around the state.
Excellent. Do you know for how long folklore has been?
Folklore, I really think, has been part of humanity since the very beginning. I'm sure that cave people had stories they would tell each other, and that evolved and spread to all sorts of different cultures. So it's very much a part of who we are as humans.
Kind of baked into humanity in general.
Yes.
So, what do you know about the Hodag?
I love the Hodag. I mean, I love monsters in general, and knowing that we have a homegrown monster like the Hodag is just really exciting.
Yeah, the idea of a giant hairy lizard stomping around northern Wisconsin is quite the sight.
Yeah.
You know, I went to investigate the story of the Hodag myself. Let me tell you about it.
All right.
My journey began when I went to one place I knew would have some information, the Pioneer Park Historical Complex. There I met with Carrie Blodorn, a local historian and Hodag expert. Hey there.
Hi there.
I'm looking to research Hodags, and I'm wondering if you can help me.
Absolutely. You came to the right place. Here at Pioneer Park Historical Complex, we have one of the best repositories of Hodag history and knowledge in Rhinelander, the home of the Hodag.
Well, I see we have one right here. What's its story? Where did it come from? How was it captured? And how long ago?
Yeah, so in 1893, a gentleman named Eugene Simeon Shepard, Gene Shepard, he spent a lot of time in the forest, visited a lot of lumber camps, and became a renowned storyteller in the Northwoods. In 1893, Gene wrote an article in our local newspaper about capturing this creature that he had discovered in the forest that he called a Hodag.
So how did he do it? How did Eugene capture the Hodag?
Gene purported to know where a Hodag den was. They went out into the forest. They put a chloroform-soaked rag on a long bamboo pole, stuck it into this hole that the creature was laying down in, and captured a Hodag and put it on display at the first Oneida County Fair in 1896. And then he took it to county fairs all across Wisconsin, and people believed this animal existed. So after putting the Hodag on display all across the state of Wisconsin, and even taking it to the World's Fair in Chicago, people around the country started asking questions. People like the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C. They were thinking about sending a team of scientific researchers up to Rhinelander to investigate the discovery of a new animal in America. And that's when Gene had to let the Hodag out of the tent, so to speak, and told everybody that it was just a hoax.
When the community found out it was a hoax, how did they react?
After the people of Rhinelander discovered that this was just a ruse, just a prank that Gene Shepard had been perpetrating, they still embraced it and adopted it as a part of the cultural fabric of their community. And Rhinelander today, known as the home of the Hodag, 131 years later, everywhere you go in our community, you find Hodags. If you're looking to learn more about Hodags, there's a lot of places here in Rhinelander you can visit. The Rhinelander Chamber of Commerce, the Rhinelander High School, its mascot being Hodag, of course. And just a couple blocks away from here is the Hodag store, a dedicated Hodag souvenir shop. Talk with Ben Burnell and he'll give you some more info.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Following Carrie's advice, I contacted Ben Burnell, local business owner of the Hodag Store and the Hodag House, a bed and breakfast where we sat down to have a chat. Hey there, I have a couple questions to ask you about the Hodag.
I'd be glad to help you.
So, what is the draw of the Hodag?
I would say some of the draw for the Hodag is just the overall curiosity that it sparks, the creativity of the Hodag, and just the uniqueness.
How do the citizens of Rhinelander honor the legend of the Hodag?
I mean, there's many ways we honor the Hodag here. It's been our high school mascot for over 100 years. We have a recently new festival, the Hodag Heritage Festival, that happens every May, where we have a day where we celebrate and glorify the Hodag.
What does the Hodag mean to the people of Rhinelander?
The Hodag means quite a bit to the city. It's been around for every generation that's alive right now. We've grown up seeing these creatures. We have them everywhere in town. They're on our cop cars, our fire trucks, our water towers, and we even have stained glass Hodags in our churches. So we're pretty serious about our Hodags.
So, how has the legend of the Hodag been passed down through the generations?
I would say that it's been passed down through several different individuals over the course of time. Some that put on reenactment performances of the Hodag at local events. There's many businesses around town that are named Hodag Express Lube or Hodag Auto Credit. Hodag is just everywhere.
And why is it important to keep telling the story of the Hodag?
Well, we want to keep telling the story of the Hodag so that its spirit never dies. It's something that every generation growing up here in town has grown up seeing, and we want to share that with others to enjoy.
Thank you so much for the interview. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
You have a wonderful day.
Yeah, you too. Glad to help.
As I began heading home, I stopped at the Chamber of Commerce to look at what seemed to be the largest Hodag statue. There I realized that although I didn't find a living Hodag, I learned much, much more. I still find it fascinating how a whole town can be enthralled by such a creature. It's a beautiful beast. Have you ever been to Rhinelander?
I have. My parents knew that I had an interest in monsters and folklore, so they made it a point to take a road trip up to Rhinelander so I could visit the Lumberjack Museum and see it for myself.
That's wonderful. What drew you to the story of the Hodag?
I mean, it's just such a great monster. Visually, it's very appealing. And like I said, I just love that Wisconsin has such a great homegrown monster.
Why do you think it's important for a town to have special stories like the one of the Hodag?
Stories like the Hodag are a really important part of a town's identity. Especially in a world where you see more and more of the same thing, box stores, gas stations, fast food places. You can find those anywhere in the country. But finding a giant statue of a Hodag is only going to happen in Rhinelander. So it really helps inform what that community is.
It definitely gives Rhinelander a character unto itself. Nothing else can really compete with that.
Yeah.
How do towns benefit from having tales like the Hodag?
Well, I think as we saw in that segment, Rhinelander has the right idea because they're very much embracing their local legend, and that brings in tourists who are curious to get a selfie in front of those statues, to visit the Hodag store and get some merchandise, or go to the Hodag festival. So it's a draw, and people who come to town to see the Hodag spend their money on other things while they're there. So it's really beneficial.
Absolutely. I know I left with a bottle of Hodag hot sauce,
Nice.
bottle of Hodag vodka, all sorts of fun things, stickers.
It's a really fun way to celebrate your town and what's unique about it.
Absolutely. We were speaking about the story of the Hodag, where it came about. It was It appears to have started with a lumberjack story,
Yeah.
the fearsome beasties,
Yeah.
and all of that.
It was really kind of a joke, but it evolved into something much bigger.
Absolutely. Now, how about I tell you about my trip to Baraboo? It started when I met a local tour guide, Shelley Mordini, at the Al Ringling Theater.
It started on a very cold winter morning.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm looking to learn more about the hauntings in Baraboo. I heard that some spirits resided here. What can you tell me about them?
There are lots of spirits in Baraboo. In fact, we have quite a few that put the boo in Baraboo.
Oh, wonderful. So what can you tell me about the spirits of the Al Ringling Theater?
Well, I've actually had some interactions with these spirits. I was able to do a ghost hunting experience here in this building. They rented it out to us, and we actually saw the spirit of a little girl. We think her name is Grace. She runs around the building. Multiple people have seen her. She tends to be in a little white dress, about 8 or 9 years old, and she haunts this building.
Wow. How long have the spirits been here, and where do they come from?
This is a very good question. You know, I've lived here for the past 30 years, and they've been here a lot longer than that. We find that a lot are coming from like the 1800s. We have some newer ones. We really feel that Baraboo has been a spot where trains come through. We have a lot of quartzite that holds energy. It's just a great spot to hold paranormal energy. They're not aggressive spirits. You know, some of them are residual. They're doing the same things. Some of them are quirky and funny. So we have a lot of interesting spirits.
So I heard this isn't the only place with spirits. What can you tell me about the others?
Well, we do have Circus World Museum here, which is the original home to the Ringling Brothers Circus. They started here, and they wintered here for many, many years before they moved out. And here at Circus World, we tend to have more of circus workers that were there, or performers. In the ring barn, we have a young man that always is walking through. We have a young girl who is a performer that is seen there. Sometimes you can see elephants walking through, there's ghost cats, different things.
So it seems like Baraboo is kind of a literal ghost town. Can you tell me about any of the other places?
Yes, we have some great events here. If you came here between Memorial Day and Halloween, Baraboo Tours, which is me, offers haunted tours Thursday, Friday, and Saturday nights. You get a walk around town, and then you come upstairs and we hand out paranormal equipment, and we do a little ghost hunt on that. We also have wonderful haunted tours around Halloween. This town embraces the paranormal. Why don't we go to another great paranormal place that's not far from here? Come along with me. Come on over here, Caleb, and I'm going to tell you about the old Baraboo Inn. So this was the train station right here, and in 1871, when the train came to Baraboo, this would have been your closest brothel that you could have came to visit. And we have a very interesting spirit here. Her name is Mary. She's the one that interacts mostly with people. Sometimes you can hear her talking. She has a white dress on, high heels, and she likes a particular song on the jukebox.
You mentioned on your walk here that you had some personal experience at the old Baraboo Inn. What was it?
I actually have a very unique experience here. One time when I got done giving a tour, there was a family with me, and they like to chat with their tour guide afterwards. And the little girl came up to me and said, "Can I play with the children here?" And I was like, looked around, there are no kids. I'm like, sure. And she runs up to the stage area, and you can see her talking, and she reaches out her arms, and then she leans backwards, and she flies in a circle with her hair flying out, except there's no one on the other side. Her parents and I got kind of concerned. We went over to her and we said, who are you playing with? And she goes, "There's a little boy." We're like, "Playtime's done."
So how do the residents of Baraboo pass down their paranormal stories?
Well, you know, a lot of people are very open about talking about their ghost here in Baraboo, and to the point that the History Press approached me and asked me to write a haunted Baraboo book. So I contacted over 80 different people who gave us their stories. Unfortunately, it was during COVID, so it was a little difficult, but that helped to bring this book to the point that we've asked to be written a haunted portage book, which is coming out soon. So we really embrace our paranormal.
Well, thank you so much for this journey. It's been so insightful. I'm gonna head in for a drink.
Okay.
I didn't personally have any paranormal experiences while out in Baraboo. Have you encountered the paranormal in Baraboo or elsewhere?
So I've been to the old Baraboo Inn, which we just saw there a couple times, and I didn't have an experience myself, but I've talked to a few people who have had experiences there, and it sounds very frightening. I also wrote a book called Monster Hunters, where I spent some time hanging out with paranormal investigators. And I'll just say, some strange things happened along the way, for sure.
Oh, wow. Why do you think there's such a draw to the paranormal?
I think, people are just very curious about mysteries in general. And especially, thinking about what might happen after we die. Does our spirit linger on? And so, that's really the intrigue of a lot of these stories and why we see them so prevalently.
Yeah, seeking to understand what happens after we're gone or what might be happening outside of our own understanding of reality is just something that's been in our culture, it seems, forever.
Yeah.
Do you think these stories have a positive or negative impact on the town?
I think they can have both. As we saw in the case of Rhinelander, people are attracted to the stories there. Old Baraboo Inn embraces their ghost stories. So I think it can be positive in that, again, it's sort of part of the identity of the town. It can be negative, I suppose. Not everyone reacts well to ghost stories or the concept of ghosts.
Yeah, there's definitely some differences in opinion or viewpoint when it comes to that sort of thing. Why do you think paranormal stories are so prevalent in folklore?
I think, again, it has to do with curiosity about the afterlife. And it's just, a compelling story. If you can add a element that's intriguing and frightening, it really just captures our attention.
Add a bit of a flourish, something to keep the kids out of the forest at night.
Yeah, absolutely.
Stuff like that. Yeah. Out of places that might be, maybe a rickety building. It's like, don't go in there. Part of the story might be, the intent might be to keep kids from walking into a place where they could fall through the floor or something like that. But how do you tell that to a kid? They want to investigate. You tell them it's haunted, that things are going to be unpleasant for them if they do go there.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of stories probably originate from tales of caution.
Absolutely. On the topic of the paranormal, the town of Whitewater has tales of witches. So, naturally, I went to investigate.
I started off by investigating a place called the Witch's Tower to see if I could find any information. There, I ran into Robert Harold, a local historian and tour guide who helped me understand the origins of these stories.
Hi there. I've heard stories of witchcraft in Whitewater. I was wondering if you could tell me more.
Well, I can certainly try. So, stories have been circulating for years and years about witches in Whitewater, witchcraft. It's really hard to pinpoint when it began because there's really not newspaper articles written about things like that. We think that actually the legends probably began surrounding the Morris Pratt Institute. So the Morris Pratt Institute was actually a school devoted to spiritualism and teaching spiritualism. And it was built in 1889, and there was a lot of women that attended the classes there. They were thought to be more capable mediums. And there was a lot of mystery surrounding what actually happened in the Morris Pratt Institute. And because of the female involvement there, we think that's probably where a lot of the legends began.
Were there any other stories of witchcraft in the area?
In fact, actually there's stories about behind the water tower and between where the dorms are, Wells and Wellers Hall, supposedly there's an altar dedicated to witchcraft buried and possibly witches surrounding the altar buried with it.
Did any of these stories lead to witch trials?
So fortunately, no. There were no witch trials in Whitewater. Even though we're known as the Second Salem, that's kind of where the connection ends.
And how were these stories spread?
Currently, the students tend to spread them, but I have my own theory. Whitewater has been rumored to be one of the stops along the Underground Railroad. So personally, I think even people that were involved possibly in the Underground Railroad could have perpetuated those stories, because that would actually take the notice off of what was actually happening.
Thank you so much for the incredible insight into these legends.
Well, you're welcome. And if you'd like to know more about the legends and more about the impact of spiritualism in Whitewater, I'd suggest going and talking to Denise Maple.
Thank you so much. I'll do that. Hey there. I'm looking to speak with Denise Maple.
Oh, hi. I'm Denise. Welcome. Come on in.
I came to learn about how the community of Whitewater was shaped by the story of witches.
Yeah, here in Whitewater, it has been shaped by the stories of witches. We're known as Second Salem here in Whitewater. We even have the Second Salem Brewery, and we even have a spirit tour every year to highlight the part of our history.
What do the locals think of the stories of witches?
The locals think a lot of different things. There are some people who want nothing to do with it, probably based on religious background or just it feels a little scary. But then there's some people like me that are just fascinated by the history of it. You know, I think witches over time have been misunderstood for years, including those which led to the Salem witch trials.
And how is the story of witches passed on through the generations?
One way is we have a very active historical society, and they do a great job of keeping track of the records of what we do know. The second piece is the Whitewater Chamber of Commerce has a spirit tour every October. So we take people on buses or on a walking tour and take them to the places that the witches are known to have congregated.
Thank you so much, Denise. This whole trip has been eye-opening.
Thanks for coming, Caleb. It was nice to meet you.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
I find it interesting how some folklore can come from misconceptions. Do you know of any other tales that have a similar origin?
Yeah, I think, you know, especially if you're talking about urban legends, those often come from misconceptions. And Whitewater is a really great example. The Morris Pratt Institute, spiritualism was not really understood by a lot of people who live there. As mentioned, there was women in a lot of positions of power within spiritualism, which was uncommon at that time. And so that evolved into whispers about witches. And you'll find that other urban legends often are based around an eccentric individual or someone, and people start to tell stories about them, and that evolves into a witch or an axe murderer or a vengeful ghost of some kind.
Absolutely. So someone who might be a little bit different on the outskirts of society is viewed as something other, and the people someone gets upset, or someone becomes sick, and suddenly it's the outsider's fault in some way that people are just kind of building up on their own.
Yeah, exactly. I think a lot of urban legends are fun, but some of them do have a root in like a place of meanness, kind of.
In your view, how do these stories impact our modern society?
I think, as we mentioned before, they're very much part of the identity of a lot of communities, so they kind of inform the landscape and the stories that people tell there, and just kind of give us a cultural reference point in general. When we see other stories, we can be like, oh, that's a similar ghost story to this other town. And this helps, you know, in our storytelling ability.
It puts a cultural touchstone out there that everyone can reference as shorthand for a situation. Have you been impacted by folklore personally?
I mean, I would say it definitely informs the way I view things, especially once you know the story about a place, then you can't help but think about it. I've met a lot of people who said that they've had paranormal experiences, so it's given me a lot to think about, I would say.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, T, for joining me tonight. Your insight has been extremely valuable.
I'm glad to be here and talking about some of my favorite stories.
To quote H.P. Lovecraft, The oldest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest kind of fear is the fear of the unknown. But what Lovecraft doesn't say is that the unknown is what sparks curiosity and brings us together. Maybe it is the unknown that allows us to tell these town tales.